Welcome, Michael. Welcome to Sydney. It's great to have you here. Now, I want to talk to you about the misinformation bill that the current government is tabling and is going to a vote in the Senate next week. The government is currently considering both a misinformation bill and an age ban requiring a national digital ID. Do you see these as separate issues, or is it part of a broader trend towards digital authoritarianism?
Yeah, I do worry about it being connected. I can't prove that they are, but the first bill, the misinformation bill, for me is more straightforward. It's not necessary. You have laws against fraud and libel and defamation and child exploitation. Those things are already illegal under Australian law. This would criminalize many forms of political speech. It has a provision that allows for the censorship of misleading information. Anything can be misleading. I was personally censored for that, and I know that the facts I had on climate change were accurate, and nonetheless Facebook said that they were misleading because I was taking people away from the apocalyptic presentation of climate change. So that's prone to be abused. There's also a provision around the vilification. I think all of us who have been criticized on social media have had the fishbowl experience of feeling vilified, and sometimes some of us ask our friends and family, is it really as bad as it looks? And it's always a more intense feeling for the person having it. That worries me. The Prime Minister also came out and said that he had seen his head pasted onto, I guess, a different head and some sort of meme, and he thought that should be censored. That indicated for me that he was coming from a place of a person that's pretty thin-skinned. I mean, you're the head of state of a major, country. So for me, that legislation is, hopefully will die. It is similar to a trend that we've seen around the world. Ireland, the European Union, Canada, Brazil have all been at war with free speech, particularly, we think, as a counter-populist strategy, accelerated after 2016. With elements of the intelligence community involved, often through intermediary NGOs in ways that are very concerning to us. The social media issue is more complicated. I'm a father, I have 2 kids. I think they were negatively impacted by social media. I think that I regret not having done more about it. I agree with Jonathan Haidt. I think the research is very strong that it has negative impacts, multiple negative impacts, and one of which is just kids aren't reading as much as they need to. But certainly the anxiety created by that fishbowl effect, I think, is extremely severe. The issue is, how do you deal with that? It's notable that Haidt, I just saw him recently in New York, and he says that he's having the most success with phone-free schools.
Right.
And then getting parent groups whose children play together to participate in restricting social media use, because of course we all know as a parent, your kids are very sensitive to what the other kids are getting, and so you want to try to do it as a group. The issue that concerns me is that it appears to be a Trojan horse to get digital identification. I worry a lot about digital identification. I wouldn't have been so worried about it more than 2 years ago, but now I see it as an effort to control behavior and potentially control speech. We see it being used in China in that way already. There's a very famous Black Mirror episode with Dallas Bryce Howard, where she is sort of being ranked socially, and it's had terrible impacts on her life. That may seem exaggerated or catastrophic. Maybe it wouldn't be that bad, but I think what we see is that when these tools get in the hands of bureaucrats, they have a natural tendency to want to expand their power. And so I would worry very much about a digital identification system taking hold in Australia.
Yes, indeed. With regard to the age ban, which is currently open for consultation, but only for 24 hours.
Right.
It strikes me as strange, because I have children as well, and they go to schools which have Instagram accounts which post pictures of the children on Instagram.
Wow.
And it seems to me that there is more that can be done by our government to get phones out of schools and also get the normalization of social media out of schools. I'm aware of one private school in Sydney that has actually gone so far as to get custom designed dumb phones or semi-dumb phones and then actually hand them out to their students. So these are phones that give you access to Spotify and messaging services, but not to Instagram. And to me, that would seem like the ideal intervention, rather than having a blanket ban on under 16s and then requiring everyone in Australia, including adults, to have to verify their age before signing up to social media. What do you think about hardware solutions like that?
I mean, I'm generally in favor of technological fixes. I mean, if you can get a technological fix, you should use it. We're definitely at a period where we need some experimentation, and that seems like a completely reasonable thing to do. Jonathan Haidt just told me that he was going to write another book. He's actually taken off another, I think, year or two just to work on this issue. Right. So I think we're in an important period for that. I mean, I think it's also important to remember that children are resilient and that we are all anti-fragile and resilient. And so I worried a little bit about over-catastrophizing. Yeah. And that children need adversity, and including social adversity and the experience of being excluded and picked on is all an awful but necessary part of growing up. Yeah. But it does just, it felt a little bit too intense, and that fishbowl effect is so intense. I see it with adults. Like I see it with prominent public intellectuals. Like they'll say to me, like, I just can't, you've seen what's been happening to me on X, or, and I'll be like, no, I haven't seen it at all, no idea. And you feel like the whole world is, because we're so social, and we're so, bred for that. And so it's so intense. And so there's also a way in which, we're all getting used to this, and discovering that we can make mistakes online and, say things we regret, and it's okay. And most people accept that. In fact, you actually get more sympathy and humanity when you do make some mistakes like that. So. Yeah,
that's true. I wrote an op-ed for The Australian earlier this year about the misinformation bill, and I argued that it sort of represents a grief response from the government or our institutions. What I meant by that was there's been a loss of control over public discourse since the internet, since social media, and since 2016 and the great populist revolts that have been occurring. What do you think of that kind of thesis, that we're seeing these moves to restrict online speech through the misinformation bill, potentially the age ban, from governments who are concerned that they really do have less power than they once did?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is certainly, Martin Gurry, who wrote Revolt of the Public, this is his hypothesis. He was at the CIA analyzing this, wrote his book in 2014. Here's a technology that, in fact, the US government was using to support regime change in Middle East and North Africa with the Arab Spring, and then again in Eastern Europe with the color revolutions. And they saw the writing on the wall. They knew it would come back and aid populism. I don't think that either Brexit or Trump happened because of social media, but I do think that they saw those elections as a concern. And I say they, I mean, I think there's both an organic demand for censorship that's obviously real. It's cancel culture. It's been around for a while. But then there's also this inorganic response from elites and governing elites who felt they had a lot more control over the news media. And we would find, videos and YouTube episodes where they would be describing how much the US government had influence over the news media, but after World War II until the rise of social media. And that's obviously Gurry's book. But no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's funny because you may know that there's a lot of progressives that are migrating to this new social media app called Blue Sky. And one of the things that's happening is that they're then creating block lists and engaging in censorship. So that desire for censorship is so intense and strong that it's definitely an organic phenomenon. And to the extent that there's an inorganic part that's coming from governing elites, it appears that it's coming from the people within those institutions that also are the most censorial, have the most, the intuition is to censor rather than engage in counter speech.
Yeah. I think, do you think that these people who are extremely censorious, have they learned any lessons from COVID? And what I mean by that is, we saw that excessive top-down control had backfire effects. And I've published an article in Quillette from a public health researcher called Roger Bate, who surveyed primary care physicians in Pennsylvania, and he's finding that trust in routine vaccinations is now declining, or has declined since COVID. So people aren't getting the measles, mumps and rubella vaccines and so on. And his argument is that the public health officials just pushed too hard during COVID. There's now been this backfire effect. And even if we look at historical anti-vaccine movements, the same thing happened in the 1800s. The English government was going to throw parents in prison if they didn't get their kids vaccinated against smallpox before they were 3 months old. And that led to a huge backfire effect. Hundreds of thousands of people demonstrated in Leicester. And so the government backed off. And it seems to me that COVID was like another reiteration of that exact same pattern. And you would think that now, since we've had this disaster and there is this declining trust, that government officials would be a little bit more hands-off and realise that trust is a two-way street. We really do have to trust the public to make their own decisions.
Well, yeah, and it's tricky, of course, too, because you do get herd immunity with, the traditional vaccines. COVID vaccine worked more like a flu vaccine, where it had limited efficacy. It reduced some of the symptoms, hospitalization, and death. That's a very tough one. But yeah, there's no question. I mean, the survey in the United States is that trust in the medical establishment was 72% in the spring of 2020. Today it's 40%. It's very low.
Yeah.
To some extent, to be fair, I think it would have gone down inevitably.
Okay.
But you also had this super empowered, woke public health establishment that also experiencing the self-righteousness of self-reinforcement on social media and the desire to virtue signal and to demonstrate their morality, this desire to show how good I am, that led to the hunting and punishing of heretics. And then the backlash that's resulted from that. We did have this election of Trump. I don't think that COVID was necessarily on everybody's mind, but by his appointments, it looks like he's trying to put people in that were some of the dissidents. People have focused on Kennedy, and it sounds like we'll talk about it, but Marty Makary is a bit more of a mainstream figure, Johns Hopkins doctor who is certainly not anti-vaccines, but also has a more balanced view that that these aren't an authoritarian approach to any of these things is just something that's not going to work. I think one of the most dramatic pieces of the public backlash was we had the White House demanding that Facebook censor what Facebook called often true stories of vaccine side effects by parents.
Yeah.
And the Facebook social scientist emailed her bosses, including Nick Clegg, who was the kind of not the CEO, but sort of big managing director of Facebook, saying, we know that censorship will increase vaccine hesitancy. So you saw that self-defeating element right there. And the White House insisted on it anyway. And part of the reason for it is because the White House was under pressure from the news media to demand censorship from Facebook.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're all sort of there's a lot to say about it, but I think we're recovering from this really intense, woke, the woke stuff was rising. And I think it really, if I had to name the peak of it, I would say summer of 2020, when the public health officials were like, you have to stay at home and the schools have to be closed, but you have to go into the streets and protest for Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
I mean, you're just destroying your credibility with that kind of thing.
Yeah. I have some sympathy for public health officials in that situation because, when people are actually dying from a pandemic, you do want people to go out and get vaccinated. It's just that we know now, with the benefit of hindsight, that people, even if they're making decisions that aren't good for them, they just have to be trusted to make decisions for themselves.
Yes.
And unfortunately, there are these backfire effects from excessive top-down control.
Yeah. And I would say, too, one corrective on the censorship is the Streisand effect.
Exactly.
Which is that we have a natural tendency to want to pay attention to things that are censored and kept secret. And so that's one of the nice counterweights. And the folks that are the advocates of censorship actually openly discuss the Streisand effect in their research. They know it exists, but it does seem like they kept erring on the side of censorship and coercion for a variety of reasons rather than on allowing choice.
Yeah.